one of those vests like Gene Kranz. I'm kind of a space guy. Great. All right. It's 5 p.m. I will call the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're here for a special meeting of the Federal Way City Council. At this time, I will excuse council members Honda and McDaniel. They are at the Association of Washington Cities annual meeting. And we also have Councilmember Lydia Cephas-Dawson appearing remotely via Zoom. With that, we are here for a study session on the housing chapter update. We'll have a presentation from Keith Niven, our Community Development Director, and Cheney Skadson, our Senior Planner.
Sorry. I need share. Sorry. I'm getting there. Okay, sorry. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council President, Council members, Keith Niven, Community Development Director. Thank you for allowing us to provide a little bit more time to talk about housing and the changes to the housing chapter as part of the comprehensive plan. We gave a brief overview at the Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting. There were a lot of questions, and so this is an opportunity for us to dive a little bit deeper on at least some of the things. Tonight, we're going to kind of focus on 4 very separate agenda items. We're going to talk about permanent supportive housing, then we're going to talk about middle housing, and then affordable housing, and then displacement. And all of those things are related, but they all actually deserve their own attention and conversation. So, kind of why are we here and why are things looking so different this year than they did previously? And kind of the culprit is House Bill 1220. And, you know, in 2021, the Washington legislature changed the way communities are required to plan for housing. House Bill 1220 amended the Growth Management Act to instruct local governments to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all incomes, and this significantly strengthened the previous goal, which was to encourage affordable housing. So we went from encouraging affordable housing to providing housing for all income levels. So the amended law also directed the Department of Commerce to project future housing needs for jurisdictions by income bracket and made significant updates to how jurisdictions are to plan for housing in the housing element of their comprehensive plan. These new changes to local housing include, number 1, planning for sufficient land capacity for housing needs, including all economic segments of the population, moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income, as well as emergency housing and permanent supportive housing. Item 2, providing for moderate density housing options within the urban growth area, which is where Federal Way is, including but not limited to duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses. Number 3, making adequate provisions for housing for existing and projected needs for all economic segments of the community, including documenting programs and actions needed to achieve housing availability. And then lastly, identifying racially disparate impacts, displacement, and inclusion in housing policies and regulation, and beginning to undo those impacts. And identifying areas at higher risk of displacement and encouraging anti-displacement policies. So those are the 4 things we're really needing to address. And how we address them, that's what we're here to talk about. So the first item we're talking about is permanent supportive housing. So this is our 11,260 housing units broken by income band. And you can see right now what we're talking about is the gray box, which is 946 units of permanent supportive housing. As you can see here, you know, the biggest single bar on this chart is housing in excess of 120% AMI. That's 5,372 housing units. We're not going to talk about that one just yet. We'll talk about that one a little bit later when we start talking about affordable housing. But right now, I want to focus for this first conversation on the permanent supportive housing. Okay? So that 946. So right now, when we...
Can I ask one question? Sorry.
Absolutely.
How are those numbers determined? Where did they come from?
That's a fair question. So what happens is the numbers, the initial numbers for total planning for the next 20 years comes out of the state. So it comes from OFM to Department of Commerce. And then what Department of Commerce does is then they allocate the housing units going out to each county. So they stay at the county level. And then the county, so for us it's King County obviously, so King County then works with the jurisdictions within King County to allocate that county-wide number into a planning number for each jurisdiction within the county. And you know, prior to this year, that stayed at that level of total housing units and didn't break down into these individual bands. But that's where this is ultimately coming from. So these numbers came out of basically county and state, and I would continue to use both of those as the genesis for these numbers.
So I understand. So other cities would have a band like this, and they have some number for PHS or 30 to 50, and this just happens to be what the county assigned to Federal Way?
Absolutely. And if any council member is interested, I can send you a link to King County's page where you can just plop on what city you want, and these bars change based on the city.
Interested.
Okay, we'll send that to you, council member. Okay. Ready to go? Okay, cool. All right, so when we originally, when House Bill 1220 was passed and we had to plan for permanent supportive housing and emergency shelters, the language in the bill basically said we have to plan for our need. Well, the need was never quantified, and so we had to determine what we thought was a reasonable number for those type of housing units in Federal Way. And the only data point we could use or could find to use was the point in time count. And so what we did is we extrapolated from the point in time count that was done in 2021, 2020, and came up with 400 permanent supportive housing units that we thought was a reasonable number for Federal Way to accommodate in the next 20 years. If I go back to that last chart, you'll see that that number turned out to be 946. And so when we thought the number was like 400, we basically set out these circles in our city and we created a horizontal separation between these types of units so that they wouldn't all locate in one part of the city. And as we talked about how big those circles should be, we started at, I believe, a half mile, and then it went to a mile, and then it kind of finally stopped bouncing around at a mile and a third. So it's 7,040 feet is the diameter of those circles. And that means that within each circle, you could only have one permanent supportive housing project. And depending on the zoning, that would either be 110 units if it was in the city center, or 50 units if it was in the BC or BN zones, 6 units in the single-family zone, and the suburban estates could be 10. So long story short, bless you, long story short, we don't have enough space if we keep these horizontal separation at 7,040 feet. So we have really two things that we can do here. We can either change the dimension of those circles, make it smaller, or we can allow more units within each project, or a combination of the two. So I think those are the levers we get to push, and we really haven't gotten very far in those conversations, and that would definitely be something that it would be nice to hear from the city council if they have any thoughts on that. But that really is the discussion about permanent supportive housing. Long story short, we don't have enough capacity. We need to change our zoning regs to make sure that we can accommodate that 946, and there's a few different ways to get there, and we're going to need to do that.
All right, if I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So these 946 units, which are low income, who's going to pay for them?
So the market is not going to build apartments for people making 0 to 30% of the area median income.
Right.
So these are going to be publicly funded projects, either 100% publicly funded or a combination of public funders along with private donations like from Amazon and Microsoft, those type of folks. But they will, which is one of the reasons why when we talked about this 3 years ago in 2021, that 400 number seemed reasonable because when you look at how much money it took to buy the extended stay, which is a permanent supportive housing, and that's only like 88 or 90 units, that was a lot of money to get one project. And we thought, okay, if you did 4 or 5 of those in Federal Way over the next 20 years, that's a lot of public money. So to get to 946, that takes a significant amount of funding, and again, part of this, and to keep you guys with the right lens on this, we don't have to ensure they get built. We just have to make sure there's the ability to build them here. Now, if there's no public funding for any more projects in Federal Way over the next 20 years, we're still okay with GMA as long as we've provided for their construction within our city. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, that ends the first topic, and then I'm going to turn over for Cheney to talk about missing middle.
Can I ask one more
Yes, sir.
question? Why, when you go back to that graph,
Yes.
why is there so much focus on these 900 units when every one of those units, graphs have probably an issue?
So, yeah, so I can go back to that if you want me to. Otherwise, I can talk about it a little
Yeah.
bit more abstractly. For housing in our city, that is, and I'm going to make a little bit of a distinction here. Emergency shelter is not technically housing. I mean, it is housing people, but because it's not permanent housing, it's considered a little bit of a different animal to some extent. And we have horizontal separation for emergency shelters in our city. But the only horizontal separation we have in our city for housing is permanent supportive housing. Like if you wanted to go build, or if Habitat for Humanity wanted to build some 50% AMI housing, they could put some here and put some on the next parcel over and the next parcel over. There's no horizontal separation there. So the only housing that has that separation, so the only one that has that diagram with the circles, is permanent supportive housing.
Okay, and permanent, just so I make sure I understand, is housing that someone lives in, they don't pay for, and they get social services because they have no other place to go. Is that?
So you are making between $0 a month to 30% of AMI. Because of our operating license requirements, there is some sort of an operator and a service component to it. But it could be, like you could be someone with Down syndrome who's in your 20s.
Sure.
And you're not going to make enough money to afford a place, but here you could potentially live maybe for the rest of your life. And that's the difference between emergency shelter, is this it could be your ultimate home for the rest of your life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Would senior, what's the right word?
You could get a senior permanent supportive housing project. That could be something you could do. It all depends on the funding, right? If you got a bunch of funders together that wanted to build housing for seniors at 0 to 30% AMI, and those type of facilities are generally, residents of those facilities are being referred by service providers. So if there's somebody who can't afford housing who is a senior, and you had a senior permanent supportive housing project in your community, then that could be a match. Okay,
Okay.
all right. Do you need me to find your presentation for you?
I'm gonna grab it off the G drive.
You're gonna do it on the G drive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do I need to share my screen?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your patience. I'm Shani Skatson, Senior Planner, and we're on to part two, middle housing. I believe by this point you're familiar with the term. Maybe some of you attended a symposium or a conference regarding missing middle last year. I have one of the books from that. But anyway, middle housing is a big piece to planning to meet our housing targets. As we alluded to in the last presentation, Federal Way has housing need across the spectrum. As you saw in that bar graph from Keith's presentation, there's a lot of housing need that doesn't need to be subsidized, but there is a large quantity of housing that is needed, the number of units. And as maybe 2 summers ago, we presented on how many developable lots we have left that are zoned for single family. And it wasn't even maybe 1/10 of the target we have. So the future development in the city is going to look a lot different than the past, and maybe we'll just dive right into that. If we took a snapshot at Federal Way's existing housing stock, it looked like this. A majority at 54.2% is single family, detached, on a lot that's ranging from 5,000 to 5 acres. Most of the single-family zoned and developed lots in the city are zoned either RS 9.2 or 9.6 or 7.2, meaning they're between 7,000 and 9,000 square feet. Coming in second is our middle housing units. Those are ranging between 2, like a duplex, to 9 units, and those would make up currently a little over a quarter of our housing stock. Something worth mentioning here is that a lot of these middle housing types we do have in the city are developed as part of like a complex, an apartment complex that has 8 plexes. So there are not many of them, a majority of these housing types that exist currently in the city are not ownership and are not part of maybe like integrating or infill into an existing neighborhood. They are multi-acre, multi-unit, big complexes. And then we have 20% of the total housing stock made up of multifamily buildings or structures of 10 or more units. It's important to take a closer look at that data over time. So that's our existing housing stock, with most of the housing built in the city between the 1960s and the 1980s. But since incorporation, this bar graph demonstrates the type of housing that's been built. Dark blue being multifamily, single family. Dark blue is single family. The gray is duplexes. Okay, it is.
You can get rid of the toolbar if you want.
There we go. Okay, great. Now I don't have to guess. The dark blue is single family. The gray is duplexes. The yellow represents triplexes and fourplexes, and the light blue is multifamily. So you can see over the last 32 years, this goes until 2022, most of our units fell into these 2 buckets of higher density multifamily with 5 units or more, or detached single family with only 1.4 of the units built being duplexes and 1.9 being triplexes or fourplexes. This further demonstrates a lack of housing choice and diversity in housing options that align well with some key demographics and a community that is urbanizing and going to have access to light rail and a lot of other growing features. So here is a graphic I'm sure you've seen before, showing kind of the spectrum of housing in between the detached single-family and the multifamily mid-rise, or the ones that we see a lot in Federal Way, like 3-story woody walk-ups. So as you can see, there's quite a variety of housing that belongs in between, known as middle housing or missing middle, since it's quite limited. And it can vary in scale and size, while we believe can be integrated into existing or as infill into existing neighborhoods. You can see on the right, these are examples of middle housing throughout the region. Some of them built more recently than others, but just as an example, a key component or explanation to understanding why a lot of understanding this bar graph is in response or can be explained by the city's existing development regulations and zoning. Within our single-family zones, there is only one that allows for any housing type besides a detached single-family. So only in our RS5 single-family zone that makes up a little over 1% of the city allows for any of these middle housing types that are here. And that's reflected, I'll get there. So as part of the comp plan, we are adjusting and redirecting some of our goals and policies to achieve a more balanced housing stock that caters to more household needs and demographics, as well as expanding housing options that can both be more land use efficient as well as affordable, and also opportunities or expanding opportunities for homeownership. So I'm going to read through some goals and policies that are drafted and proposed to address middle housing. So goal 2, diversify housing supply, including typology, size, rent or ownership options, and income levels served at urban densities to maximize the benefit of transit investment. When we say maximize the benefit of transit investment, that means transit-oriented development around the station area, but it also means when you're outside of the transit station area, half a mile, that it's not immediately met with detached single-family, but rather a gradual density around those higher opportunity areas. Policy 2.4 says increase capacity for and promote greater diversity of housing, bridging the gap between detached single-family and dense multifamily. And implementation, so where the rubber will hit the road. Adopting these goals and policies set the groundwork or framework for us being able to amend our development regulations. This table here shows our residential use zones. There's SE, suburban estates, and then the RS means single-family residential, and the minimum lot size. So RS 5.0 means it's a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. As you can see, only the RS 5 zone allows for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes.
So the green is what allows?
What currently permits, what our development regulations at this moment allow. And the RS 5 zone makes up a very small share of the zoned area in the city. So we can understand why this graph looks the way it does. There's very limited opportunities to seeing yellow and gray based on our existing zoning. So through the housing chapter, with goals and policies to promote and increase capacity for diverse or expanded housing options, we can then amend the development regulations, something that we are expected to achieve or accomplish by June of 2025 in response to House Bill 1110. So that's the middle housing bill.
Question. So if we were just to change lot zones and make these things available, which we've been doing for the last year and a half, I think, as we go through land use, then this problem becomes less of a problem because you've changed the zoning, and if the developer wants to spend the money, they can do it. Is that what you're I mean, is that really the avocation or the story?
I'm not completely sure I understood the
Well,
question.
right now, we have lots that are 7,500 and 9,600 and 15,000. And if we wanted people to put 5 plexes on a lot, we would have to change the zoning so they could do it.
We'd have to change the development regulations that, that would allow.
And we've done a lot of that.
Not as it relates to middle housing.
I thought we've been
We've been
making
doing
it
a lot of
easier,
work around-
easier all along.
We've done a lot of work around making our, mixed-use zones. So when we came back with the report from the Housing Action Plan Implementation Grant, we amended a lot of the code as it relates to our BN, or our BC and our CC, and these are our mixed-use city center zones that are serving transit. But the single-family zones have not been amended.
So like, for example, I'm just a hypothetical, because if we have to do this kind of thing so people can have places to live, I believe. But if we took the area from the mall all the way down to Christian Faith Center, that big area, and said, we're gonna rezone all this and make it so you could put a 5-plex, a 4-plex, a 3-plex, a tall and skinny, wouldn't that be a long way to getting this problem fixed?
Well, most of that area is zoned RM, so it's
Okay,
multifamily.
so
So
any-
looking at this table,
Yeah.
the green, it already allows.
So they can already do everything there. Then why aren't they?
Well, there's,
I mean, in your professional opinion, if we've made it so they could, what's holding people back from doing this?
I don't know. I mean, I think that there are a series of other code amendments that we've done that would assist this in terms of applying the multifamily school impact fee. That's something that we believe prohibited multifamily development, which middle housing is considered multifamily currently as our development regulations read. And that's something that we've resolved. But yeah, there's not a huge appetite, I guess, but we haven't heard, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
That's all right.
All right. A couple of things. One is, so it sounds like that we have, in that area, I mean, that, a lot of units could be in there. And how many are we short for the?
I'm hesitant to agree because we should look at the development capacity of that area. It may, depending on how built out it is currently or the existing infrastructure there, whether what is the zoned capacity to achieving more of these units.
So basically, it sounds like that the reason that where we do have zoning that allows it, one of the reasons that it is not being used is the economics of it. Would that be accurate?
I think that in the multifamily zone, you're allowed a higher density. So the RM zone means you need 1,800 square feet per unit. And if you have a larger lot, you're not going to limit yourself to middle housing. You're going to be building more to maximize it. I mean, but it's not like there's a lot of new multifamily being proposed in the area.
And also going back just a little bit before also, is that it seems like on some of these figures, we're kind of apples and oranges because can you go back to, okay. All right, so this graph here is showing, that the apartments are in blue, and in the gray are duplexes and the yellow fourplexes. So we have duplexes, fourplexes, and then bigger than that. Now go back to the previous slide. Okay. So middle housing is up to 9 units. So there's a gap between that graph that's showing 2 units and 4 units, and then multi-family. So how much of that multi-family may fall within this 5 to 9 units?
Yeah, this graph can be further broken up. I have the data here on terms of how many of our middle housing units in the city are between 5 and 9 units. That was just a bad judgment call in terms of how to break up the data. But that's something that can be easily resolved or.
Because it seems like that what it's showing may not be accurate in the, how the meat is being met and how the.
Okay, so the
What we
housing
have
units for Federal Way, housing units by structure size, for 2 units or more, it makes up 425 units of our 37,000 housing units, 400. For 3 and 4 units, 3,764. So about 10%.
And so 5 to 9 to make.
5 to 9 makes up 4,409 units of our total. I mean, I can give you all this in percentages, not right now,
Okay,
but.
that's fine, that's fine.
Council President Kuchma?
Thank you, Jeannie. Am I correct in assuming that most of the neighborhoods in Federal are zoned either 7,200 or 9,600?
In terms of
Single-family?
number of lots, yeah, I think most of the
Single-family
number, like,
residential.
single-family zoned lots are between 72 and 96.
So how would this middle housing code amendment affect RS 72 and 9,600? You know, because we have a lot of people, as I do, a house on a big lot, you know, may not be situated appropriately, but how does that affect all of our big lots?
So what the purpose behind this future code amendment that we're not, proposing right now, but just discussing, is allowing where you're only allowed to have one detached structure, allowing up to maybe 6 in some of these areas. So where you would have got an immediate denial if you proposed it, depending on your lot size, or not even just depending on your lot size, because of your zoning, then you could apply to have different housing types, a duplex in the backyard, triplex in the backyard, or the front yard, depending on where your setbacks are.
So for example, how does that affect the neighborhoods then with parking?
That's a piece of amending the development regulations that will be considered, whether we require 2 parking spaces per unit like we currently require. If you want to develop a single-family house in a single-family zone, you're going to need to provide 2 parking spaces. Well, we have to, when we go through this process of changing the allowed housing types in the zones, we'll need to look at what should be the parking requirement for those new units. And that's something that will be presented.
So technically, my brain is racing ahead a little bit here. But does that then make that property more valuable? Because they could say to a new owner, look, this is zone now where you can have a duplex in the backyard or a triplex or whatever on the property. Does that then make the property more valuable?
In terms of development capacity, I think so. We often hear how much adding an ADU in the backyard adds value to your house. So having additional housing options, I think there's also like the qualitative value in terms of households or families looking for lots that have multi-family units on it, in terms of intergenerational living or other, having your family or your parents or your adult children living on the lot and it being more affordable.
Councilmember
you.
Dovey, and then thank you, Council President. Councilmember Dovey, and then Councilmember Sepidawson has her hand up.
Cheney, the question I have is, I thought with the new law of the state, you can put 5 or 6 houses on the lots now.
That won't
Do
go
we have
into
to-
effect until
Do we have to do
June.
something to make it easier, or
That-
is that already able to be done?
No, it is not able to be done. It's not able to be done. It does not apply until June of 2025. So if we don't amend our code by June of 2025, those state laws will supersede ours that say you can only have one detached housing unit.
But if we, before June of 2025, said in Federal Way, it's okay to put 5 units on somebody's lot, then this middle housing thing could start to become less of an issue?
We would, hopefully, through the process, we would be complying with the requirements of 1110, and then that would be how to resolve it.
So the answer is yes. And so if we know it's coming, maybe that's something we should do, and then people can, it's going to come down to economics. If somebody can get a loan to build 6 houses on their lot, they'll probably do it. If they can't, they won't. Is that?
Sure, last week we had a conversation with the master builders of King and Snohomish County, and we talked about what, some of the cities are ahead of the game, like Kirkland has already chosen to amend their development regulations to allow middle housing in
Yeah,
their single
Kirkland's
families.
got a great deal. You build a house, you put one next to it, and you got a cottage, and you sell 3 of them.
So
I mean, that's
they're
a home
seeing
run.
some of these happen, whether it results in demolishing the primary unit to rebuild something more efficient or not. But yeah, they're seeing it both as in fee simple, like creating home ownership options where they're creating individual lots even though they're attached.
Okay. So.
That's the east side.
That's one of your suggestions. We should probably speed that up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this was included as a key strategy.
So it's based on resources, right? We've got a dozen code amendments that by statute we have to be finished with by June of '25.
Yep.
And this one, along with a bunch of others, are all kind of queued up in our to-do list.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of just getting enough planning resources to write code, to go out and have community conversations, and then to bring it forward. So we'll do it as quickly as we can.
Okay.
I only have so many planners.
No, I guess, but, sorry for going on this, but, you know, we have so many meetings about middle housing, and we all know it has to be done. And we have all these meetings about the 400 or the 900 units, and the state's passed laws that says, hey, this is where we're going, and if we just maybe did some of, you know, made it so you could do it, then we wouldn't have all these meetings about what we should do, because we already did it. I guess is my only comment.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Sapadowson?
Yeah, it's just a follow-up on Jack Dovey and Jack Walsh's question about that property between the mall and south of that. I know that you were just using that as an example, but I think we've also circled back to where we said it all depends on what the property owner or the developer wants to do at the end of the day, right? Because we don't own those properties. And so we can zone all we want, but if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it, correct?
That's correct.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So I think that's what I wanted to understand, because I think we can zone it, but I think if the people don't want, if like Linda said, if you want to stay in your home forever, then I think that's quite okay. So I guess having the zoning code there and making all the changes for future use is what we're doing right now. But then I guess we sit and wait and see what people do with their properties, is my understanding. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that was all I wanted to say.
Isn't there a concern for people that save and be able to buy a home in a single-family neighborhood, and then they're living in a neighborhood that they purchased this home to live in a single-family neighborhood, and then their neighbor, after this law goes into effect next year, their neighbor across the street or next door to them can put a fourplex, sixplex, and essentially change the entire dynamic? Isn't this going to break up single-family neighborhoods?
I think in a way, yes, it is going to change the existing character of single-family neighborhoods, but, I mean, we have a housing crisis. The housing demand has not kept up with the supply, particularly in Federal Way, and the housing that's being developed. So if we do want a diversity of housing options that aren't just single-family and multifamily, we need to loosen the valve and increase what's allowed in these zones.
That's fine unless you purchased your dream home, and now you've got a sixplex right next to you with no parking has been adjusted for it. Hey, my position is, I don't think the people who live in Federal Way have owned their primary, your home is your primary investment in your life. Usually, oftentimes, toward the end of your life, you use it to finance your retirement, use it to finance your next generation. And I don't think the people of this community have any idea what's been done or what's coming. Just a thought, that if somebody next to me and across the street and next door to them put in a fourplex, a sixplex, and then all the parking on that street, and literally change the dynamic of your neighborhood, you're going to have some very unhappy people who have invested their life savings in a neighborhood. I think it's something we got to think about as we think about housing in our communities.
And if I can make a comment, Mayor, that's why we might want to advocate taking different areas and designating
Yeah.
them now.
Yeah.
So
Because
it's easy for someone to go build these types of products. Not easy, but this is where we'd like it to be.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
that's kind of my point, too. For example, there are some areas where it would work, other areas it wouldn't. And those areas that would work, you've just increased the value of their property, like you've told me before. And I do know a person who bought their property with that in mind in the future. So, yeah, if we could designate the areas, it might work better.
So this is why we haven't rushed out with a proposed code amendment, because this is going to be a lot of controversy. So to be compliant with 1110, we can't just take a small piece of the city and make it sixplexes and keep the rest single-family detached. So we'll talk through all of that as part of the process. We will engage the community as best we can because there'll be a lot of opinions on this.
Yeah, I could guarantee you that 90% of the people in this community, in single-family neighborhoods, have no idea what's been done. And until the fourplex and the sixplex gets put right next to them. And then there's nowhere to park. And what you'll see is people who own these homes sell them and move on. And then their property gets redeveloped. This is an attack, in my opinion, on single-family homes and neighborhoods. And it was done really without widespread support and knowledge.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Where do CC&Rs come into play with this? Does the state, does 1110 override CC&Rs? Or does CC&Rs for a neighborhood, does that able to stay in place?
So if there are covenants in existence which limits the number of units per lot, those still apply to those neighborhoods. If you came in with a subdivision tomorrow and wanted to apply covenants that limited it to 1 unit per lot, that would not be allowed. So everything that's there is grandfathered, and it would take the neighborhood, the HOA or the subdivision to change that limitation if it happened to be on the plat already.
Okay. All right, so that would help address the mayor's concerns, I think, right? Or,
That's going to be all of our concerns soon.
well, no, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
no, I agree, that is the concern of, that would be, but I think that would help, help alleviate that concern, because I think that most of the areas do have, where they're single family, the majority of them do have CC&Rs.
But you'd be
That-
surprised,
But
actually.
I don't know, that's something that we need to look into and find out.
Yeah.
What areas do have CC&Rs that would
Very-
impact it, and, because we do need to protect the existing, property owners, that's their, hey, that's their baby.
So we need to comply with the statute, right? If there are private covenants that limit that is what that is. And, you know, ultimately, how that plays out, this will get back to Councilmember Dovey's point earlier, is we can change our regulations all day long. We may never see one lot, there might not be a tear down and a sixplex built in Federal Way for the next 5-10 years. It's going to be, a lot of it will be up to the market.
Right.
So, okay, I'm going to move on to topic 3 because we're running on time. So the third item we wanted to talk about tonight was affordable housing. And, you know, we define affordable housing in our code that for sale units at 80% or below area and median income, and for rental units at 50% or below area median income. And for affordable housing, I'm back to my favorite chart, which is our housing units by income band. And for affordable housing, we're really talking about the 0 to 30% not permanent supportive housing, the 30 to 50% AMI, which is this 842, and then the 30 to 80% AMI, which is this 208. And if you add up those 3 columns, you end up with 2,849 affordable housing units that we need to plan for over the next 20 years. I said I'd talk about this big brown bar on the right-hand side, the number of housing units we're intended to plan for, over 120% AMI. The reason there's not a lot of focus on those units in our comprehensive plan is because the market is really supposed to provide those units. So assuming we have lots available and we know our zoning, we have more capacity than to meet our target. So those units should come because just the market should provide them. And so that is a reason why we don't spend a bunch of time talking about those. But the ones that are below, basically 80% and below AMI, those generally take some level of either incentive or regulation or something to get those units to actually come to the market. So we talk about regulated and non-regulated affordable housing. Regulated affordable housing, right now, there's really kind of two methods. We have an inclusionary requirement in our city code that says if you're doing more than 25 units, 4% of those units need to be inclusionary for 50 years. An example of a project that meets that criteria and provided those inclusionary units that was recently built is Trouvé, which is at the southeast corner of 1st and 348th. We also have a 12-year multifamily tax exemption provision in our code, which nobody has taken advantage of yet, but it also requires a certain percentage of the units to be affordable. And that we may see that as things continue to redevelop in our downtown area. And the second thing is funding requirements. So these projects utilize tax exemptions or affordable housing funding sources. They are not provided by the market. Examples of affordable housing located in Federal Way: William J. Wood, Park 16, Kitts Corner, Uptown Square, Redondo TOD, which is under construction right now on North Pack Highway, Shag Celebration, Shag, Willamette Court, and the KWA Senior Housing. So those are all examples of affordable housing within our city that is regulated. Non-regulated affordable housing is housing that's more affordable just because it's older or smaller or located in a less desirable part of the city. For example, if you live in a subdivision and you're on the corner lot that's next to the busy street, that house is going to be worth less than the one that's 2 houses over, even though those houses might look almost identical in size. And so the thing about these units that are not regulated is they can basically be improved, renovated, and increase in value because of actions of either the owner or the tenant potentially, and they may become more expensive. So a number of the housing units that we consider part of our affordable kind of portfolio, they may disappear over the next 20 years because they may get to the point where they may be replaced with more expensive housing. So I'm not going to read all this because I think not many of you really want me to. So I'm going to read just the goal. So we have a goal or a proposed goal in our comp plan, and it basically says encourage and incent the development of affordable housing and mixed income projects, providing for a range of housing opportunities affordable to households with moderate, low, and very low incomes. And there's a number of policies that play off this goal, but really this is the kind of language that's been drafted into our housing chapter that really says, look, this is something we know we need to provide in excess of 2,000 affordable housing units. We should try and encourage them and incent their construction within our community because it provides more housing choices and diversity of housing for everybody. So with that, I think, again, I'm not reading all that. We have draft goals and policies. We are out for public comment on the housing chapter. And so if any of you would like to chat more about affordable housing, either regulated or non-regulated, more than happy to do that, and tonight or at another time during this process.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, one last question for me. So what if we ignored all of this? What is the consequence? I mean, does the AG come and take the city council away in handcuffs because we didn't do it? Or do we not get grants? Or what is the consequences? I'm not implying that we would ignore it, but just it's good to know what the consequences would be.
This is a great segue. Thank you for asking that. I'm going to just pull up the anti-displacement presentation.
The answer is we lose money.
So before you get into that, I have one other question. So a lot of, we always forget because the sewer district is separate from the city. But a lot of the city, not a lot of, I don't know what percentage, is not on sewers. So a lot of what you want to do, I mean, you can go ahead and plan for it, but if the sewers aren't there, it's probably not going to happen because the sewers You'd have to go into a developer extension agreement, which is quite expensive unless you got the neighbors to also agree to this.
So, and that's a great point, Council Presidents, and it is a housing point because it affects the developability of lots. Federal Way has the most septic systems in all of King County. We're the champs. So, part of this conversation that we're going to have under the capital facilities and utilities chapters of the comprehensive plan is, should we be increasing kind of our expectations for people hooking to sewer? Right now, there's a fairly vague language that says if it's reasonable, then you have to hook to sewer. Well, reasonable's never defined. Is reasonable 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet? Other cities have a numeric number. If there's a sewer within a certain number of feet and you want to build a house on that lot, you have to connect. And so we can have that conversation as part of those
Sure.
other chapters.
So, thank you, I'm glad we are. But I think that if you're going to talk about, paving the roads or doing something to upgrade the roads, you should be talking to the sewer district about how to extend the sewers. Because, the sewers are very expensive, and they're based on area, but also on front foot. So if you have a lot that has a lot of front foot, it's used to be a couple hundred per square foot along the front. It could be extremely expensive, and you have to pay for it over like a 20-year period of time. So, but it would appear, part of this is getting the sewers in the ground so you can make a decision on what you want to do. But I think you should be talking to the sewer district about how we could partner on getting grants or something to get the sewers. We can talk about extending sewers across the freeway because on the east side, because a lot of that is not sewered at all. It's all septic. So if you're talking about development, you really have to bring that whole concept in. I mean, everybody's on water, but they're not on sewer.
Absolutely, totally agree.
Okay.
Okay.
If I could make a comment on sewers. In Portland, many years ago, they ran sewers through, and you didn't have a choice, you hooked up, but they financed it over 10 years. I mean, that would be, that way you could make sewers become reality.
And you can even have low-income areas that could get grants for the sewers. I mean, you could plan, but you need to look at the whole picture.
All right, please.
So back to Councilmember Walsh's question, what happens if we don't do this? What if we don't plan and accommodate housing that's affordable across this spectrum of incomes? One of the consequences is displacement. People who currently live here or who may have lived here their entire life as a result of light rail coming and market pressures and just high demand for housing, that the housing that some of these existing community members can't afford will go up and they can't afford it. And as a result, it leads to displacement. And that's a consequence of not having housing that suits or meets the needs of the local community. In this presentation, I'll give a brief overview of the different types of displacement indicators for understanding who may be most likely to be displaced, as well as different areas of the city, and discuss the draft goals and policies relating to anti-displacement strategies. Physical displacement refers to households that are directly forced to move for reasons such as eviction, foreclosure, natural disaster, deterioration in housing quality. It really comes down to the physical displacement. The housing unit you're in, you can't stay anymore. Whether it's purchased and redeveloped and demolished, as a result, you may be displaced. Economic displacement is what I was getting at earlier as it relates to the financial piece. You're currently only spending $1,000 in rent, but a new light rail station is opening a block away. Your landlord's going to charge $1,500 next month or more. So the economic displacement is not being able to absorb an increase in rent and remain living in the unit you're living in, or maybe the community you're living in, and having to seek more affordable housing options elsewhere, like farther south in Puyallup or Buckley, and increasing your drive to work or whatever. economic displacement. Cultural displacement refers to more of a community-wide or neighborhood-wide impact, and can encompass both physical and economic displacement. This is when residents are compelled to move because the people or the institutions that make up their neighborhood have left the area as a result of no longer being able to afford to stay, or the physical redevelopment or that occurs. So this could be culturally specific grocery stores, churches, amenities. Communities with high risk of displacement or high displacement risk. So those that have significant numbers of cost burden, low or moderate income households. So if you're already spending more than 30% of your income on housing, you're at a higher risk potentially of being displaced because your ability to weather an increased rent is much more difficult than someone who's not spending more than 30% of their income on housing already, or if you're already a low or moderate income household. The redevelopment pressure or market from public investment. I've mentioned light rail a couple times, but that's really one of the big driving factors, in addition to local investment. In the Town Center 3, the TC3 redevelopment plan is going to add a lot of value to the city, and it's going to be great to live nearby. So there's an impact of both economic and potentially cultural displacement when investment is made locally and can drive up rents around. Rapidly growing marginalized communities of color populations. So as Federal Way has become increasingly diverse over the last couple of decades, there are potential for cultural displacement without strategies to prevent it. If there's a low supply of long-term affordable housing and unprotected or the naturally occurring affordable housing, that could increase in rent at a relatively easily, that results in a high risk of displacement, and neighborhoods with high concentration of renters. And that could be for both or all physical, economic, and cultural displacement. So we're going to dive into a couple Federal Way data. So in terms of cost burden, 1 in 2 Federal Way renters, half of Federal Way renters, are spending more than they can afford on housing. Almost 30% of Federal Way renters are spending more than between 30 and 50, or more than, 23% of Federal Way renters are spending more than half of their income on housing. Whereas those single-family neighborhoods that we were talking about earlier that may own their homes, they face a much smaller, are much less likely to be cost burdened, spending more of their income on housing, and are less vulnerable to a life-changing event of no longer being able to afford and stay in the community you've lived in. Federal Way, here's a breaking up how our income. So our area median income is for the Seattle, Bellevue metropolitan statistical area, and the median is the middle, 50% above and 50% above. In Federal Way, that's not the case. Only 35% of Federal Way residents make above 100% of the AMI, whereas making up like around 7 or 65% making less than 35% than the 100% area median income. Was that clear? I can restate it. Sorry. Federal Way has a much higher percentage of households making less than the area median income than 50. So when considering that information, we'll get there. This is a map of Federal Way's census tracts with data on the racial distribution of households. And when considering areas that are maybe at risk of cultural displacement, you can see along between I-5 and Pack Highway, there are three census tracts that are outlined in dark purple. Those ones are a majority multifamily zoned. And those also have high rates of non-white households. And so when considering the impacts of light rail access and a growing urbanizing community, developing community, these areas may benefit from strategies and protections in place to prevent the displacement. PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council, as part of their regional growth strategy, assessed the displacement risk. And those areas in orange on this map are identified as having a high risk of displacement, which align with what we were looking at earlier, where some of our most diverse neighborhoods are, and as it relates to multifamily zoning as well. The PSRC displacement risk map here includes a number of indicators of socio-demographic information, incomes, the transportation quality, neighborhood characteristics, housing inventory, and civic engagement are among the indicators. In the housing chapter, we plan to address displacement through the following goals and policies. I will read them if we have time. Okay. Is that, we're good to read them? Okay, so the goal, housing goal 8 is to work to help keep people in their homes and limit economic, cultural, or physical and cultural displacement. The policies are to explore opportunities for implementing community preference or right to return policies, work with property owners and management companies to provide additional advance notice of rent increases, intent to not renew lease or lease termination evictions, provide language assistance services for those needing assistance facing displacement, explore opportunities to provide assistance to help retrofit or remodel existing housing to meet tenants' changing needs, consider the development and funding of a relocation assistance program for households that are at risk of displacement. Any questions or comments?
Council? No, go ahead.
That's all.
Okay. Council, any other questions or thoughts? I think we had all our questions during the presentation. Okay, and what, I think,
Mayor, I do have a comment.
Councilmember Sefa Dawson.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my button, so I'm so sorry. My concern is, especially after hearing the displacement of communities and not having adequate housing, affordable housing, I think I would love for our council to be more understanding and try to figure out, because we do want people to be housed. We don't want anybody to be forced into homelessness, right? So I know, Mayor, you did feel strongly about single-family neighborhoods, and I understand. However, I believe this policy is really to help all the people that need to be housed. And so I think it's a good policy, because we're here to represent people who need, if they want to live in Federal Way, and if that's what's affordable, or if that's the community they want to be in, I think we should be open to accommodating that. And I sense resistance from our council to this whole policy. And so, as someone who was a renter, I mean, thank God I do own my house now. I purchased it, but I was in that boat, and concerned and worrying about when my rent is going to go up, and nothing in place to even safeguard people who are renting. And the statistics that was just shared with us, 50% of people can't afford, their rent burden. And I think I would like everyone to really think about everyone who's going to be impacted or who is impacted by housing shortage, housing rent increase, and all these things. So thank you for the presentation, but it's something that I really need to digest and think about, because I don't want anybody to be unhoused because we are concerned about, people who already have their homes. I'm not going to live on this earth, forever. So I think we need to also consider people who are coming behind this. And one thing that was said to me recently is, when we displace people, we are displacing a community. We are breaking that community structure. And sometimes that's why we don't even have a safe neighborhoods, because the people who had maybe who are around their extended family unit are now scattered everywhere. So as a young kid, they don't have that family net. They can't go hang out at their grandma's because now they live, 20 miles away or whatever. So I would encourage our council to really consider about this conversation and see how it's going to impact, and who are we leaving behind as we're having these conversations? Let's be more inclusive and let's understand who needs to live in Federal Way and who we're welcoming. And yeah, I have a lot to say, but I think I've said it all. But I appreciate the time, but I also want to challenge our council to really consider about who we're trying to leave behind, or who intentionally or unintentionally, who we're really leaving behind as we're having this conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Councilmember. My concern are for the people, the unsuspecting individuals who have invested a lifetime into their single-family residence and in their neighborhood, and then unbeknownst to them, the state law has changed, and next thing you know, they've got a sixplex right next to them, across the street, right next door, without any kind of, I think it's for a single-family neighborhood. I think there's a lot of ways, we are unanimous in our concern about making sure that people are not homeless or houseless, but I think that there's a much better way to go about it than letting the private sector start breaking up single-family neighborhoods. I think you're gonna see a lot of people, once they figure this out, once they figure out what's been done, I think you're gonna see some people very upset. So,
Okay, so I think let's educate people, but also a question for you, Mayor, or for Keith. Is upzoning a problem? Can we do that since we're running short of space, right? There's no land. After a certain time, I mean, there's not going to be land to build on. So is upzoning an option? Is that something we should even have in this conversation? Because I'm really concerned as we're trying to protect the single-family neighborhoods. Again, you still can't build that many triplex and, you know, the numbers that were needed. And so it's a question, again, I think we should have that conversation to see what we could do and have high rises, because what else can we do? And it's more of a question. I don't know if that's even an option, but I think it's a timely conversation. Thank you.
And just a quick answer to you, council members. Yes, everything's on the table in terms of a conversation. And I think just to remind the council, Councilmember Dovey has asked for a more detailed conversation about that area from 324th down to 336th at LUTC in July. So assuming we're still on for that, this will give us an opportunity to talk about like a specific area, what it looks like, look at an aerial photograph, kind of take a look at what's available, and if we were to change the rules, what might happen. And I think we can kind of continue this conversation to that meeting.
all right.
That'd be great. There are two, I think, structures that are being built there, and I don't know how high or what the density there is, but I know there's two projects happening on 333rd and 20th South. So, but anyway, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh, and then Councilmember Dovey.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we should be taking a look at, and maybe have it as one of our goals, is to make sure that when we are passing ordinances and things, that we are doing things that will make it as easy and economical to develop or redevelop, and less costly for that to be done. You know, and lots of times regulations can be done with a great, you know, the regulations can be put in place for a great purpose, but sometimes they can be counterproductive in making things more costly. And I think that that's one of the things that here and throughout the state, throughout the nation really, that one of the things that has driven the price of housing up is more regulation. And so I think that we need to carefully consider regulations. You know, take a look, are the regulations in place that really are counterproductive to having more affordable housing? And as we look at new regulations, what can we do to make sure that they are not driving up the cost of housing? Because that's across the board, whether it's low income, whether it's high income, everything is that can drive up the cost of housing.
Totally agree.
Councilmember Dovey?
I just have one other comment. I don't know how many meetings ago our state representatives came here and talked to us about all the great things they did for housing and the money they put aside and all these great programs. And, you know, we've been talking about all sorts of different things here. why don't we see if we can come up with some sort of demonstration project and ask for $5 million and do something that actually addresses the problem instead of always talking about it? Maybe we could come up with an idea that, hey, we're gonna build ADUs in people's backyards who wanna donate their land, and then, you know, somebody that can afford $1,000 lives there and the city collects the money. I mean, maybe we should try something out of the box instead of always talking about it. Try doing something, and who knows, maybe we'll find a solution that works. I mean, all these things that you and Cheney have presented are great. We have to do something, but let's maybe drive a stake in the ground somewhere and say, okay, we're ready to do something, and ask our representatives to pony up the money they said they found for all this housing stuff. Somebody's got to ask for it, right?
Well, good. We've got meetings coming up with him pretty soon, so. we'll-
Okay, well, thank you.
Council President?
I'd like to explore the fee simple homeownership option a little further. For example, if you have, you know, someone on the property and they want grandma and grandpa to live on the property and maybe kids, you know, if you do a fee simple where there's a homeownership option so that you all own the property rather than you're bringing in new people, it's really the family that's expanding, actually. That's one idea, but I'm also wondering, you know, we still have all that area east of the freeway, which we've never discussed, and I don't know at what point, probably not now, but at some point, we need to talk about that, because that can't sit there forever. They are our PAA. I'm not sure whether that's going to make this problem worse, in other words, you know, double our numbers that are needed, but that certainly is an option of being able to expand to find affordable options, because that's a lot of land over there. Some of those people do have 8-acre parcels that they do want to develop. I don't know, at some point, maybe we need, but again, we're back to that sewer issue, because it's the extension of the sewers. Anyway, so thank you.
Okay, we've got 20 minutes to our regular city council meetings. I thank you very much, Keith and Cheney. Great presentation, a great discussion. We will be in recess until 6:30 PM.